What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Paranormal Council. I hope you guys are having a great evening out there. You're not going to want to miss tonight's episode for sure. We are going to be discussing spiritual warfare. What does that mean? We are going to get into that, so you're definitely not going to want to go anywhere. And we have a special guest with us tonight, one of the original Paranormal Council members, Shawn Carter. Shawn, why don't you tell the folks a little bit about yourself, since they already know pretty much the rest of us.
Well, I am in southwestern Virginia. I am a kind of a Virginia Tech in North Carolina, Tar Heel, kind of in between the two states. So, you know, if you're a Tar Heel, I can pull for you. Virginia Tech, I can pull for you too. So, but I've been involved with dealing with the paranormal probably since I was 19. Well, even probably earlier than that. I believe that I was introduced to a lot of spiritual stuff when I was young. I had extended family that was involved in different types of folklore movements and kind of crafts and stuff. And in fact, I grew up 5 miles from probably one of the oldest ritual sites in the country. It's actually named in a couple of folklore books, but I won't go into that now. But I had family that's in that, and so. But I was also introduced to the Bible, and I grew up without really going to church a whole lot. But I did hear about God and angels and demons and stuff like that. And as I began to experience the spiritual stuff going on around me, and these areas that I live in. Around 19, I started working with other teenagers that were experiencing things, and the church wasn't dealing with them. And so I actually became a youth pastor at 19 and started helping the teenagers in our area deal with a lot of stuff that they were seeing and dealing with in this area. And it kind of just, I started studying different world religions. I started studying everything I could get my hands on about jinn, or, you know, from the spirits in Thailand, the spirits in the Hindu belief system. I kind of just started educating myself on the different belief systems that's out there. And God just began to use me to do different things, different ministries throughout this time. I've worked full-time ministry for almost 35 years now. And so this is just a little bit about me, but I got my own channel. I had a channel before called Unveiling the Paranormal. I had about around 600 videos, probably 1,000 subs. And I just, between me and YouTube, kept fighting. YouTube finally won and took me off, and that's okay. I started a new one called Biblical Paranormal, where I talk about the Bible. And this is really and I'll kind of wrap up here, Josh, with this. I really wanted to bring the conversation back, into the community. I feel like Christianity has left the table of discussion in many different ways and threw its hand at the paranormal. And I want to bring that back. I want to be able to get into discussions like we've done in the past. And I want to be able to sit down and dispel a lot of myths. A lot of Christians don't even know what the Bible even talks about. And so I want to sit down and really discuss what the Christian point of view is. And yet I understand the other views. I play well. So I just want people to know that I'm here to answer questions and talk about from the Christian point of view, from what the scripture says. And that's kind of what I've been doing for the last 30 some years. So.
Nice. And, just a couple things real quick. One is, Alpha, no, you can't have my hats. What is it? Why do you always like my hats? Last time I had my Ghostbuster hat, he wanted that. And also, hi from Tulsa. Hi.
Hi, Mom.
Yes. Hi, Mom. So but when I met Shawn, God, it's been quite a few years now, really. And I think you were on a podcast, maybe. I think you might have been on it might have been with Vappy, Virginia Paranormal.
I think so. Virginia Paranormal, I worked with them quite a bit in the past. I haven't here lately, but yeah, I've worked with them quite a bit a long time ago.
I think I like stumbled across you on a podcast, and I remember listening to you, and I remember thinking to myself, like, here's somebody that is involved with like the church and religion, and I hold Christianity close to me in the world of paranormal, which is kind of rare sometimes in the paranormal field. You run across, you don't always run across a lot of that. But here I was hearing you on this podcast, and you were very open to discussion. And I think one of the things that you said that made me laugh, because I don't think I've ever had thought about it up to that point in my career, was you had said, why don't we see any caveman ghosts?
Right.
And so, and it just kind of like hit me, like, that's kind of funny, and it is something to think about all at the same time. So anyways, that was where I met Shawn, and then of course reached out to him so he could be a guest on the Everything Paranormal show when I was just doing like a one-on-one kind of interview style. And then from there, I think we spent more time off the recording, off the live stream, just you and I talking about theory and all the stuff, so we became friends, just like how with Stacy and everything, meeting him. And so many of these discussions happen more off the camera. So
right.
We're just going to have to keep rolling one of these days, like whenever we end the streams, and then just post some kind of like secondary behind the scene footage or something. But
we were just talking about that because all the great conversations happen after we get off, when we really get going into it.
Oh, but anyways, guys, so those for you that are watching, let's not delay anymore. You're probably here for spiritual warfare. And so just a quick little basic definition. I don't have anything in front of me. So sort of the mainstream definition of spiritual warfare, it's associated with a Christian term, and it really is the struggle, sort of the invisible struggle, not a physical, but a spiritual struggle between sort of yourself, like the good and versus evil, your battles against sin and the devil, and, all things that keep you from that path of God or walking with God. And we can get into the armor of God and all kinds of stuff, but that's kind of the general definition, right? I think you guys would agree with me. But I think that in the big picture, it's that good versus evil, right? And you can engage in spiritual warfare on multiple levels. And tonight, we're going to talk about those different levels, some different things that you can do individually. Maybe you're not a Christian, maybe you are. Whatever the case is, we're going to try to work with everybody out there to help yourself for that spiritual battle. So let's dive into it, guys. Who wants to go first? Let's talk about, what does spiritual warfare mean to you?
There she is. Chanel was like frozen for like 10 minutes. You did that. Having a stroke.
I don't know how I'm under spiritual attack here with the internet. So, because it just doesn't work here apparently.
Well, spiritual warfare to me actually runs the gauntlet. I mean, you have spiritual warfare that is between the living, and you have it with the other side as well, because we are influenced by the other side while at the same time trying to work out our own issues. And anybody who conflicts with those, a lot of times we see them as being evil, even though that it's more tribalism than anything else. But it is, the different tribes have their own spirit, and that part is part of our heritage, going all the way back since man stood upright. Every tribe has its own gods, or its own spirits, its own thing, and those spirits themselves war against other tribes. And we're just carrying that forward, even though we don't necessarily recognize it that way. Today we call it, racism, or we call it, anti-immigration or homophobia or whatever. We got different names for it now, but it's still a lot of the same tribalism that we've been dealing with since, beginning of time. So, warring on spiritual levels, we as people go at each other, and then we go at the spirits of the other side the same way, considering what is good and what is evil. And, it causes a lot of confusion because every culture has its own idea and ideology.
Okay. Shawn, Janelle?
I think when you look at like the paranormal field in general, spiritual warfare can really kind of be seen as like when people get attachments, because there's things that are going on that like opens them up to get attachments, and so that's my opinion on that.
Did you say good attachments?
No, like for people to get attachments.
Oh, get attachments.
What are good attachments? Where do they come from? Where do we get them?
Okay. Jen, Shawn?
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, Josh and I were kind of talking about this last night. Growing up, I grew up in the church. And every time we talked about spiritual warfare, it was literally always about God and Satan and the fallen angels. And the thing that I remember the most growing up in the church was that everybody around me in the congregation really truly believed that anything negative in their life that happened to them was spiritual warfare, right? Yeah. And very rarely did I ever see them take accountability for their own choices. Absolutely. In what caused it. And so, that was always really interesting to me growing up, and in some ways did play a part in me going away from the church for a while. But every church is different, right? And every leadership is different, so I'm not speaking for all of them. But, going into the paranormal field or being part of the paranormal field since I was a child in that type of environment, spiritual warfare to me has always looked very different. And at the end of the day, I would say for all of it, no matter how you look at it, there's a bigger picture. There's an interconnectedness and a bigger picture that none of us understand and probably won't in our lifetime here, at least not even close to fully. But just trying to understand it a little bit better, understand more of the pieces of it, trying to put it together, trying to make those connections. But also, it has to do with everything from how you investigate to how you view your neighbor, to your own ethics in the field, all this para-unity drama stuff. A lot of that could be called spiritual warfare, differences of opinions and things like that. So I don't think you can have any part of paranormal without the discussion of spiritual warfare.
Absolutely. And Andrea said, sorry, I'm late, guys. And I would say you should be.
Andrea, you have a timer.
Apology accepted, but I don't let people off the hook. When they say they're sorry, I don't go, oh, it's okay. I go, you should be. Okay. So anyway, try that. It's funny. People are like, whoa, okay. I mean, it causes them to own it, right? Shawn, you're up.
Well, I think from me looking into the ancient Near Eastern philosophy and what the ancient Hebrews were looking at, they were experiencing the gods around them. They were experiencing their own eternal torment inside. So if you kind of go back and look at it, there's 4 enemies, and I kind of just steer the direction this way. The Bible talks about the Tanakh, the 4 different types of enemy. I'm going to save the biggest enemy for last, and the first enemy is Satan, the adversaries of God, the adversaries of humanity. And by the way, the ancient Hebrews looked at it that way. They seen that there was a adversary to God himself, and then there was also adversaries to humanity. So they had this understanding that they were some spiritual forces that did not like humanity itself. It didn't matter what religion they were in, they just didn't like humanity. And so they began to see that. So the first one is the entities around that are against humanity. The second one is the world system. There's a world system out there that's not, and I think we can look at our society and see that today. There's a system at play today that is not for humanity, that does not bring good. It doesn't bring love. It doesn't bring caring. It doesn't bring what needs to be brought to the table. And then third, that is the other people. Like Stacy said, there's just differences in opinion. There's differences of so much of the law in the Levitical law is how to deal with someone who's wronged you, or if you wrong somebody, how do you deal with that? And then the fourth one, and the last one is self. Self is one of our biggest enemies. We have to learn to deal with our ego. We have to learn to deal with our pride, our lust, our desires, our covenant. To wrap it up, that's kind of what I see as spiritual warfare. In dealing with the paranormal, I think it's all interconnected in those four somehow or another.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I appreciate you kind of summarizing on the four really classes of enemies, and it makes sense because, like Alpha in the comments was talking about, he said in his view that spiritual warfare can be considered everything from a conflicting thought within yourself to the standard good versus evil, and that's again really the overall arch, and really it's good versus evil, whether it's within yourself or external forces. Really, it's all that battle, right? So what we want to look at is what let's kind of break it down to like a little bit of individual and how this may relate to the paranormal field, like investigators and things like that. So I think one is I would like to dive in when the last thing you were talking about, Shawn, is what can investigators do for their own personal spiritual warfare? Like, why does that matter going into an investigation?
Am I going first?
Sure.
Well, I think from my standpoint, I'll just be honest and transparent here. There's times people's called me to come and help deal with something going on spiritually in their home. And I've had to decline, not because I didn't want to help them, but because I wasn't in the right place. Maybe I had a lot of anger. Maybe I had a lot of stuff just going on personally that I just could not deal with at the time. And I've had to say, look, I'm not trying to put you off, but right now it's hard for me. I know some people don't understand that, but I think you have to take care of yourself first spiritually. Whether we could try to define what's good and evil, and maybe we can later, but you have to be comfortable where you're at and what you're doing. I think if you're going into this thinking you know everything, if you're going into this with a lot of pride, if you're going into this with a lot of anger, you're setting yourself up for what someone said a while ago. I think Chanel said, the attachments. That's where you start really getting into a lot of problems.
I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you said that. Because
Stacey, I'll let you go real quick. I just want to jump in, and this is what I'm kind of aiming for on this level of conversation. This first step is that first step of when you start to do any type of spiritual warfare or even consider it, and like what Shawn's saying, start with yourself first. But yeah, go ahead, Stacey.
Yeah, it goes right down to the whole idea of attachments. People don't understand what those are, why they even do that, why spirits, attach themselves to somebody that's at a haunting. Well, for the most part, lower level spirits, I wouldn't necessarily call it evil spirits, because sometimes spirits are just dead assholes. They're not demons or anything like that. They're just dead people who are just assholes. But they still find entertainment in making us dance around like a sock puppet. How they get their way in to manipulate you is through attachments. They find out what is one of your 7 deadly sins. The 7 deadly sins: your pride, lust, gluttony, whatever it is you got going on that is your weakest point. That is their point of entry, and that's how they get you and start really messing with your life on a serious level. Outside the paranormal, just every day moving around, going from place to place, going to work, relationships, everything else, They attach and they start to destroy and chip away at your life through your own weaknesses, through your own.
I got the fat demon.
Well, gluttony. I wouldn't say that was your worst one, but that's how they get it. And if you don't have that, if you don't understand who you are and what your flaws are, you can't anticipate what they're going to use to manipulate you with, because they're going to find the weakest thing and use that. So.
Jen, Chanel?
I was going to let Chanel follow up on her attachments conversation. And then I'll take
turn the volume first. Her microphone. Your microphone. There you go.
These technical difficulties that I have. I mean, honestly, Stacy and Shawn both really kind of talked about everything that I know about spiritual attachments. Just hitting it when you go through it real bad, it's when you open yourself up. Like I said, when I first mentioned this, but I don't know nearly as much about this as I probably should. So I'm really here today, really to learn and cause all the technical problems, and maybe for a little bit of humor, because that's what I'm good for.
Well, we've talked about it in other episodes we've done. We touched on it a little bit, even in the witchcraft episode. We talked about it in the psychology episodes, about spiritual maintenance and the importance of that, and how a lot of times in the field, we don't see a lot of investigators doing a lot of spiritual maintenance. And, I'll just say this, I don't care what type of spiritual maintenance somebody does, right? But if you're going to believe in preaching, cleansing your crystals and charging your crystals and programming your crystals, and yet you show up in an investigation and you haven't done that for yourself, that's a problem, especially when you're just, putting yourself out there. You're asking for an attachment, and people are really looking to you not only for, the data and safety in their experience and new understanding of the paranormal, but if you're showing up, allowing yourself to be vulnerable to get an attachment, you're literally destroying your credibility in that setting, right? And so we've talked quite a bit about spiritual maintenance on every level, whether it's every morning you get up and you do your devotions and you pray. Whatever that looks like for you, you have to do your spiritual maintenance. But as far as attachments and things like that, people, it's not just people, we see people get these attachments, and we were talking about residentials. Josh and I got into a long discussion about residentials yesterday, and maybe we'll have to do that in a future episode. There's a lot of ins and outs to that one. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll have a lot to contribute then.
Yeah. But, that's where a lot, I think, of this misunderstanding of the difference between what people would see as a negative spirit, an attachment, and a demonic. A lot of people don't understand the difference between the three. And, some of the stuff on TV shows, it's clickbait, right? It's to get attention, it's to get views, things like that. But when it comes to the day-to-day and the entities the spirits that we meet at different locations, or even at Walmart, they're completely different, right? And I think it's important, too, to discuss that with the spiritual warfare, because these spirits that want to attach utilize, yes, those weaknesses, but they're very, very sneaky about it. And what do you look out for? How do you protect yourself from it, and make sure that you're protected going in?
Yeah. And just to kind of wrap everything up from all you guys, this amazing discussion, is the biggest thing. I think that one of the big takeaways from everything is, if you're going to get involved in spiritual warfare or whatnot, if you're a paranormal investigator, you just got to start with yourself first, and you have to know yourself. Just like even Shawn said, if you are not ready, and even Alpha in the comments was talking about how he had to step away from an investigation. So sometimes you have to know those moments and know yourself And so you can remove yourself or not put yourself in that situation ahead of time. And then, so also, I would say with the preparation, spiritually preparation, I think that was something that we're all kind of in agreement with, is doing some things, prepping yourself. And I think for team leaders that might be watching this, or even people aspiring to be leaders in their paranormal team, you know, maybe remind people at the beginning of an investigation, like, hey guys, are you guys all set spiritually? Is everybody feeling okay? I think it's important to make sure, because that way, if somebody seems to be off, or if you observe a team member and they're being like a butthole or something, it's like, hey man, I'm gonna have to ask you to sit out this time, because something's not right with you tonight, and you're off. No offense, but either that, go step away, go, I don't know, you know, cool off or something, you know, get your head right, come back and talk to me, and then maybe you can come back or something. But always pay attention to your folks, see if there's anything different. So, but I want to also kind of lead into, let's start broadening this out a little bit, because Jen, when she was said something, had reminded me of some of our discussion too, and that is when people would go either do their prayers and things like that. And that kind of reminded me of, we talked a little bit as well about how, you know, society in general, you know, think about it. There was a time, and this was important, going all the way back many, many cultures. All the original cultures, all were very spiritual. They spiritual awareness, very God fearing, or afterlife fearing, basically, whatever it was. But they feared those things. There was a lot of superstitions. They had a lot of rituals. They prayed. They did a lot of things all through the times. And really only until recent times have the society gotten away from sort of mainstream church and religion. The church is all declined. Now, granted, even Christianity is on an uptick again. But if you think about society as a whole, there was a time when, like, majority of people every Sunday at least would at least go to church. They would have that ritual. It was almost like a spiritual cleansing ritual, right? And people were able to sort of reset their spiritual aura by attending some type of church, like I said, whether it was, you know, their synagogue, or, you know, Christian church, or whatever it was, whatever religion. They were more devout to it, I think, at some point up until the last 20, 30 years. And now we get a lot of people that are just either not even practicing anymore, or they say they're a certain religion, but they still don't even go to those churches or practice those things. So we have a lot of decline in that. So I guess what I'm kind of proposing to you guys is, what do you guys think about society in general, with their overall position of where their spiritualness is, and how can they individually get back into straighten themselves out, or as a society?
I think it's a cycle. We're going through a massive transition right now, and it's not like it hasn't happened in the past. I mean, we were dealing with Eastern mysticism during the 60s. Everybody was doing acid all the time, and, you know, the Beatles and all that. And it bled into the 70s, but into the 80s, there was a resurgence of the born again movement, and the birth of the megachurches, and that dominated the 80s and, you know, early 90s. That weaned back a little bit when the TV preachers started to die off, but you're seeing a resurgence in that because governments around the world still need good religion. Every atheistic religion, every atheistic government that has ever existed withered and died. The ones that survived had a good religion attached to it. And I use that term good religion specifically because that was Machiavelli's advice to the prince in his little booklet called The Prince. You needed a strong military and a good religion in order to have a good government. And Machiavelli didn't care what the good religion was. It just needed to be a good religion. And it's a truth. You have to have that. And we're seeing a resurgence of that now with the Trump administration, because believe it or not, Trump is a staunch advocate of Machiavelli in that regard. Always has been. It's how he got so good at the art of the deal. But anyway, why you're seeing the resurgence in that is because he recognized that element and brought in the Charlie Kirk, the USA turning point. You know, that resurgence of the youth is what is rising right now in recycling that cycle. You know, we had Enlightenment with Thomas Jefferson, which tried to get away from the Catholic Church. They pronounced themselves, the founding fathers pronounced themselves deists, where they stripped away all of the miracles of Jesus, but followed the Bible. Actually, there's a book called the Jefferson Bible, where Jefferson physically took a pair of scissors to the Bible and started cutting out things he thought was all weird superstition. You know, the walking on water part, and held strictly to the philosophy of Jesus. And that's what was the Jefferson Bible. And they give every time a new congressman comes in, they give that book, the Jefferson Bible, to every new congressman. It's part of the care package when you first get elected to Congress. And it's the philosophy of the founding fathers. And that cycle has carried on in America pretty much for every 80 years, ever since the rise, the death, the rebirth, the rise, the death, rebirth, that fourth cycle or the fourth turning. We're seeing it, and it's, believe it or not, I did some research, deep research with AI, with Perplexity about the topic. And on YouTube, even though you're not seeing it necessarily in your feed, but YouTube has seen a massive resurgence in spiritual topics, because young men are rudderless right now. They're completely wandering around, not knowing what life is about. Thinking, is this it? I went to college and I'm now $200,000 in debt, and I'm sitting on a couch playing video games all day because I got no job. They're rudderless. So they're looking for a spiritual outlet. And they're looking on YouTube and watching a lot of videos in that regard. And that, of all the trends that are going on right now, that's the biggest one, according to AI. This spirituality that we're talking about, those spiritual warfare, people are really, really thirsty for it. And they're finding it,
Jen, Janelle, Shawn?
Well, I do want to comment on how you had said that, like, the thriving governments, they had the strong military and a strong religion. Religion was originally, like, created to control the masses. So I'm not surprised that you have a really good government with good people that don't really fight back when, we have a strong military and we have like, a way to control it.
That's not what religion was originally created for. Religion simply means return to. When you talk about the Christian religion, it is the return to Christ. Or the Hindu religion is the return to. That's really all religion means. And it predated what you're talking about is what happened after Constantine in the Council of Nicaea. Because that's when the state and the religion became one massive machine. And you had the Holy Roman Empire after that. That's why we had
the separation of church and state.
I was about to go there.
Yeah. But before that, I mean, religion and government were intertwined, but in a very different way. It wasn't a way to manipulate the people through government. They were separate institutions, but they were still state-sponsored religions. The government gave money to every religion in Rome. It was a smorgasbord of religions in Rome prior to Constantine, and the Roman Empire at that time would give money and build temples to every different religion. They had they had temples all over the place to all these different gods from all over the place, and they considered them to be all the same but different cultures. So, it was state sponsored, but it wasn't a control mechanism necessarily the way that you know it to be.
Well, I was actually going further back than Roman. I was going back to like Egyptian. Also, same polytheistic society, right? Gods for everything under the sun, right? We have these gods, so they're going to smite you if you do something wrong. You can't do that. That goes against Ra. You know what I mean? So, like, it's even further back than like Common Era. We're talking BC, you know, and that's where this religion was formed from. That's how women got suppressed, which is an entirely different topic. But you know, all rooted in that. It's all rooted in mass control.
Well, okay. I mean, if you think so, let's just say that that's true, right? You know, again, if the Egyptians were, and I'm trying not to get too deep into the weeds on religion and stuff like that, and even politics, right? But you can also you could look at it in the sense that this is also why Jesus Christ was sent down to earth, because we weren't always doing things correctly. And so when you look at in modern times too, the moral framework of this country is based in Christianity. The moral framework, okay? It doesn't necessarily mean you have to follow the Bible and things like that, but the moral framework that our laws and things are governed by, that this country was founded upon, the principles. And what I find really cool though is I have talked to a few different. What do you call when you believe in God but you're not a Christian? Is that agnostic? What do you call that? Like atheist?
Agnostic.
Yeah. Agnosticism or agnosticism. So
right. So I've talked to some people like that, and they agree. They say, look, I don't care if 90% of this country goes back to being Christians, because they want that moral framework, and that's what they talk about. They like the principles behind Christianity. They may not believe 100% of the Bible or whatever their beliefs are, but they like that the principles and the framework that things were based upon. So, but I think that the resurgence of an uptick in religion, regardless of what religion it may be, I think, you know, again, it's helping us in general. And I just wanted to add, since I'm already talking, that we're talking about, like when Chase was talking about, it's like the way we talk about it's like the pendulum, right? The pendulum of pop culture. So we swung so far one direction recently that now the next generation is kind of starting to make fun of that, and things are starting to have an opposite reaction. So now these generations are, the newer generations are starting to lean the other direction, and it's the pendulum starting to shift the other way, and who knows how far that's going to go before, and this kind of is what goes back to that repeating cycle that Stacey's talking about. Eventually, that's going to get so stuffy and so whatever that people will make fun of it, and the modern thing will be to sort of rebel against that, and then the pendulum will slowly swing the other direction. God knows how far that's going to go. Hopefully they don't just keep getting extreme on both directions further and further, because you know what happens when you do that as a kid, you swing, you go over the hump on the swing. You know, we're all screwed in. So but no, like, so that's why I think, like, with for me, and just to kind of wrap up what I'm saying, I think that the uptick in religion is a good thing, no matter where you lie on the fence with it. Most people in general believe in some type of God, some type of thing beyond, you know, and that's a good thing. And hopefully we'll kind of wrangle things in. But I'm going to kind of shut up now. I kind of rambled on a little bit, but I just wanted to add my stuff about the pendulum and the culture, and also the moral framework of this country. So one of y'all take it, Jen or Shawn?
Well, I think for me, I want to talk about the Christian community, because that's where I know the most about. I see things happening good, and I see a lot of happenings bad. I think the young men are tired of being told that they're stupid. I think the young men are getting tired of being told that they're worthless. And they're searching for spirituality, but there's also, on the other side with the women, they're searching for spirituality too. So I'm not saying that there's one more than the other, I think the women are finding more with the goddess type religions, and the men are looking more towards the westernized. Whether, and when I say this, I'm not saying they're not Christian, but I think a lot of young men are going more now to Eastern Orthodox than anything else, from what the statistics I'm seeing, which is a complete shift away from Western ideology of Christianity in many different ways. But I think you're right, Josh, that we are seeing pendulums. And I think what scares me is the connection that uh, that I'm seeing with the political part of this. That scares me. I do not believe in Christian nationalism. I'll just say that. I know that I'll probably get raked over the coals by a lot of my own constituents, but I don't believe in that. I believe we're a melting pot in this country, and I think we as Christians need to back up and say these things are right and these things are wrong, but we need to all come together to the table, and that's kind of what I've been about. Now, with that said, I think the pendulum for some when they join this political party. I look at the Crusades. Now, the Crusades had to come because of something else that was there, with the Muslim issue going on, and it was response to the Muslims of the time. I think we're seeing that cycle happening a lot right now, and that kind of scares me too, because I think that pendulum swings both ways, Muslim and then the Christian response. And so a lot of these pendulums scare me. Just to be honest with you guys, I don't know if it's any better. Kind of like what you said, Josh. I'm kind of somewhere down here saying, let's kind of calm down, guys, and let's look at the spiritual content rather than the political leadership and all that. But anyway, I'll digress.
You guys bring up some really good points, and Josh brought up this pendulum, and it's a great example. He also brought up pop culture, and we're seeing these big swings, right? And when we think about that in terms of the paranormal and access to social media, ways to stay connected, all of this, we're seeing a huge pendulum swing in the paranormal and in activity or claims of activity. So what's that correlation with this uptick in people searching for spirituality and the uptick with paranormal activity? There is some type of connection there, right? They're going hand in hand with each other. And then when it swings the other way, then we lose it, right? And people keep talking about the thinning of the veil and all these different things, and awakenings that are coming, and even talking about spiritual war that's coming, right? And so you guys make a great point with the pendulum. And what are we actually looking at? What are we walking into doing this type of work in this time of this spiritual rising, right?
Yeah.
I think that, go ahead.
With the uptick in that, I feel like that, yeah, there is a correlation, because the more that people are searching for whatever answers they're searching for, they're also accidentally probably dabbling in things they shouldn't be at the same time. So that would make sense, right? And while we're all searching for whatever, it's those spiritual journeys that we all go on when things get, okay, so like, let's talk about like retrograde, for instance, right? People hate it when Mercury goes in retrograde because they're like, oh, my life is falling apart. No, your life is aligning. Retrograde in the spirituality world, right? That is a time for shifting, a time for change, a time for alignment and realignment. But a lot of like people in the witchcraft world will be like, oh, it's coming, my life's over. No, you just fucked yourself up, and now you're going to go back and fix yourself. Like, that's kind of what it is. And so I don't know if I forgot what I was going to say.
You make a good point, though, because you're basically talking about retrograde being the equivalent of kind of like going to the priest and having confession, right? It's a time of realignment, of shedding the old and beginning the new, and recommitting yourself to your beliefs and practices. And you're right. There's that subsection of those that practice wanting to make it be a negative thing. Oh no, my life is over. But then, from there, we got to talk about the psychology of it, and even going back to weaknesses that open us up for attachments and 7 deadly sins and all of that. It's just one big giant circle. And I think that's what gets me the most in the paranormal is how many people don't understand how important spirituality is.
Mm-hmm.
It's the thing that opens up your ability to encounter these things, communicate with these things, understand these things in a whole different way. But it's also the way to open yourself up and get in trouble.
Yeah.
Get in over your head. Right? And it's so easy to go either way. And I've preached it 1,000 times. I don't care how many years experience you have. I don't care how many books you've read, how much knowledge you have, how much you think you've prepared. One day, you will find something that is bigger than you, stronger than you. It's going to get you. It's going to knock you to your knees, right? But if you're not even doing the basics and asking yourself, you're asking for it, right? You're going to these places and you're asking for it. But I forgot where I was going with that. Chanel, we're having a night.
We are. That's being normal.
Yeah. Well, look, it's time to get right with Jesus, folks. Well, look, I want to get into as well, and Stacy, I know you're getting ready to say something too, so I'll let you finish that as well, like your thought. I just wanted to jump in there and say, look, if anybody that has been in this industry, most people watching this, everybody's believers in something beyond, right? Something beyond this life, and most of us in this field have encountered bad things, okay? Whether they were demonic or evil spirits or whatever, however you want to word it, okay? We've all encountered the negative sides of this industry, so there is something out there. Evil is real. We see it all the time on the TV, in human behavior. There's crazy people out there, government stuff, whatever, politics. We see the evil out there. It is insane. Okay, so no matter what, you need to be prepared. No matter what you believe, what your belief is, you need to be. You have to at least acknowledge there's something bad out there. So if you can understand that, then that means you need to understand you got to start prepping. All right, spiritually. Anyway, Stacy, what was you were going to say before
I was going to bring it back to the Mercury retrograde thing. Mercury goes retrograde every 90 days. If your life turns to shit every 90 days, the common denominator isn't Mercury. You need to actually work on yourself in that regard. The planets do have somewhat of an influence, but Mercury he's the communicator in mythology. He's the one that controls, travel. Things that go wrong with your computer, your phone, the internet, and your car are pretty much where he's limited to on Mercury going retrograde. If you start getting fired from your job every 90 days, it's not Mercury retrograde. I was born when Mercury was retrograde. That's my natal chart. When Mercury goes retrograde, my life becomes fantastic. It's wonderful. For about 2 weeks, I'm doing great. And then I have to struggle the rest of the time. That's just life, So don't blame Mercury for everything.
Well, Mercury must work for Spectrum because my internet sucks half the time. Anyways, but yeah. Guys, tonight, by the way, I just wanted to throw this out there. I don't have to jump out of here right at 10 o'clock. So if we go overtime with having 5 of us tonight, I'm just letting you know if anybody does need to leave right at 10, you always can. Or we can end whenever we all want to at this point tonight. Just throwing that out there in case we get into some deeper subjects on this too. So I want to get in a little bit more as well as to, again, I'd like to make sure we always tie this into paranormal investigations, things like that. I think that's important as well. Do we see? What do you guys think? Are we going to see even more paranormal activity? Are we getting an uptick of that? Is that what we're talking about as well? Are we going to get more paranormal activity, and is people going to need more and more help because they're not getting proper help spiritually?
I would say that, yeah, because that makes perfect sense. And then at that point in time, it comes down to like when people reach out to you and like, oh, I had this thing in my house, whatever, I went and played with Ouija boards and whatnot. Like for us, I'm gonna be like, yeah, I'm an ordained minister. I know how to cleanse houses and all that, but I'm gonna be like, you need to go see somebody else. I'm not qualified for that. Because people do open themselves up every time that they do that, and it just creates chaos.
On that front, opening yourself up, some people consider that to be they're just like a doorway that you just open yourself up. Some people are always on. We would call them empaths. They're very sensitive to not only spirits in what's going on, but people in a crowd. It's actually what Carl Jung classified the personalities of everybody into 16 different categories, and the ones that are the most empathic would fall into the INFJs. That's the introvert. I can't even remember what it is right now, but basically they're the ones that are the most empathic. They walk into a room and they can feel everything that's going on in the room. You bring them into a haunted location, and the first thing they're going to do is start taking on all of the stuff that is going on with that spiritual environment. And it can literally, if they get an attachment and they don't get rid of it and they don't take care of themselves to spiritually detach from that, in short order, they end up, screaming at buildings and frothing at the mouth, because they're just, completely consumed with things that they think are inside them. They can't tell the difference between their feelings and the feelings of those around them, much less a spirit. They all consider it, because it's kind of narcissistic to think that all that's happening in your head is all yours. It's not. And spirits will talk to you as though it is your internal voice, and you will start hearing yourself say things and say, well, I think I should just do this. And it's not you that's actually saying that. It's being put into your head. And if you don't recognize who you are, know who you are, and recognize your thoughts from others' emotions, others' feelings, other communications, you're going to start to fall victim to other people's manipulations or other spirits' manipulations, because you're taking that on yourself. And that's the difference. You have to know yourself, know what you think, how you think. Everything that goes on inside your head isn't always yours. We like to think it is, but it's not.
You bring up a good point that we haven't really talked about too much with the attachments and things. And I don't think, a lot of people are like, oh, well, it's just an attachment. I can just go get cleansed or whatever, and it'll be fine. I can just go get rid of it. People don't understand how attachments work, right? And they don't realize that after so long of having one, it really does, like you're talking about, those thoughts are not yours. Like, there's bits of you in there, but it's not all you. And it starts to eventually change, like, your core, right? Like your core beliefs and all those things. So, and maybe Shawn can share a little bit more about this, dig a little deeper into it, because he's much better with words than I am. But, when you get attachments, you do get to a point after so long of being vulnerable and being open and kind of merging with this attachment that you do develop like a possession, right? And you get to this point where one minute you're like, oh yeah, I have an attachment, this is bad, get rid of it. And the next minute you're like, no, I'm fine, there is nothing wrong with me, this is me, what is your problem? And when you get to that point, then you have this ethical issue that investigators run into, and people who work with cleansings and healings and exorcisms all run into, of at what point does free will have a say, and then who are you talking to, and how do you determine when you can and cannot take action, right, ethically? And to me, that's scary, because I hear a lot of people like, oh, it's just an attachment. Yeah, you're right, it's just an attachment. Give it 3, 4, 5, 6 months, and we're going to be having a completely different conversation, right? So, I mean, maybe you can enlighten a little bit more with your experiences and things on that.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm not going to name names, but I usually get so upset when I see these guys on TV. Oh, I'm possessed. They run outside. Now I'm good. They go back in. They ain't going to help you, bro. It's just not, because you're doing the same thing. You're repeating the same thing that got you to that point. Um, Attachments, what we call attachments as Christians, is in it. By the way, I've never really seen a 100%, what I would consider 100% possession. That is a very rare, in my opinion, that's a very rare thing. Um, I see more attachments in what you guys just said is number one thing that I think is people don't realize the influence that these spirits have. You go home, from tonight's investigation, and you start seeing a pattern of depression, a pattern of anxiety, a pattern of fear. It may not have anything to do about fear of spirits, but it may be a fear of getting a germ or getting whatever. These things are coming involved in your life, and they're beginning to influence you. One of the very first things I train a lot of pastors now, believe it or not. I actually train a lot of pastors to do what I do. And I'm a Baptist pastor, and most people like, "Are you Baptist?" And yeah, and they're like, shocked. But it's like the very first thing I tell them is you need to learn the difference between your sinful nature, your desires, and how you work with your emotions before I can talk to you about demonic entities, because that you need to learn the difference between your ego and something else that's happening. When you can learn who you are and learn your voice and learn what's happening, you can start spotting, oh, wait a minute, this is not right, this is not me. And sometimes when it gets very deceptive, because they can get very deceptive, and you start going into the prayer life and saying, Lord, what's going on here? I'm not understanding this. And he begins to show you what's happening here. And it's at those points you begin to learn the difference between who you are and who they are. And I think learning who they are. And so I think it's so important what you guys said. And I'm glad to hear you guys talking about that in those ways, because that's one of the number one things I see and help people see is, no, the demon is not messing with your car. The car just messed up. Stop blaming demons for your car messing up, and also stop blaming demons for your hatefulness. That's not the demon, that's you. And so learning the difference between these things is so important.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that, as far as possession is concerned, there are levels to possession other than full on mount, where this is what you're talking about, like movie Exorcist, things like that. The first stage is literally losing your impulse control. You go shopping and you see a can of Cheese Whiz and you're like, God, I would really like some of that. Next thing you know, you're squirting it into your mouth. You're losing impulse control. And then comes the depression and the mood swings and things of that kind. And then you start falling into what's known as obsession, where you will fixate on something or someone to such a degree to where you put your life and their life in jeopardy. You live, breathe, and sleep that obsession, whatever it is, to the point to where everything else starts to fall away in your life. Your health, your job, your family, friends, everything. And a lot of people, consider alcoholism to be in that category, but obsession in of itself is where it is the last stage before full on mount. Because if you are still in that obsessive state for such a period of time, you technically are under that spirit's complete control. They just haven't decided to wear your meat suit yet, and that's where full on mount takes place.
Well, I would agree with all that. And the only thing I would add about full on 100% is a willful giving over. I think that's a full willful giving over to the spirit that's there. Um, we have seen the rituals that talk about that, and I've dealt with people who's went through that type of stuff. And when you when I they went through that, but I don't think they were yet fully engulfed. What I call fully engulfed. Um, my mentor has seen that, and he worked with some of the people of the Catholic Church, and seen some of those things. But um, I think there's something to be said. Somebody, I think Jen maybe said a while ago about the free will issue. There's a lot of free will stuff coming here, and coming back to the paranormal stuff. When you're dealing with, when I go to a home and someone's called me, I'm looking at that person's spirituality first. I'm not really caring what's going on in the house, because I know what's going on in the house is more likely happening because of what's happening in the family unit or in that person, more than likely. And so that's where I'm going to go, is look at their spirituality, look what's happening with them, and help them deal with what they need to deal with. Before we got on the air, I was talking about I've been working with a house up in Ohio area, and this is one of the issues that I'm facing in that particular thing. There's a younger person there who's in total rebellion over everything, and it's hard to control. They've been arrested. They've been, they've hurt people, and so I just tell people, be very careful when you go into a place. If you're dealing with other people, be very careful and understand there's spirituality happening everywhere.
Yeah.
I got a couple things to kind of piggyback off that one. And it's funny because Josh just looked at me. He's like, weren't we just talking about this? Because yesterday when we were talking about the ins and outs of residentials, we were literally having this discussion. So it's great that you brought it up. Yeah. But, there's a couple of other things that people misunderstand about these attachments. And one of those things is they seem to think, if I get the attachment, it won't be a problem. It won't jump to anybody else. And obviously, if it jumped to you, it can jump to anybody else. So you're putting everybody else around you at risk as well, whether it's a team member, a coworker, your mailman that you just happen to go get the mail from one day, your Amazon guy, all sorts of different things like that, right? But back on the levels of attachment possession, right? One of the big things we haven't mentioned in like the steps and the progression is that paranoia phase, right? And when that paranoia hits, that's like a precursor to the obsession stage, because then you become obsessed with being misunderstood and being attacked, or this constant threat, and you're constantly fearful. And paranoia starts small, right? But again, like you were talking about the willful giving over, it's essentially what it is it's a surrender to this. Like you're so exhausted at this point, you're so scared at this point, you are just willfully giving up. You're saying, I quit, I can't do it anymore, right? And it is a choice at that point to just resign yourself. People talk about it when you do work with like hospice, right? They get to a point where they're like, I understand, I concede, this is how it is. They talk about it leading up to their own passing. And it's that same type of thing while you're still here in your physical form, and your physical form is not going anywhere, right? But it's a spiritual giving over. And I've actually heard it. It's interesting because when you get people debating about religion, right? And this Christian concept of giving your life to Christ, they talk about that being a willful giving over of your spirit too. But there's a big difference, because when you're talking about a negative attachment, you're talking about giving it over to evil versus giving it over to good, right? But at the end of the day, we're making choices. We're surrendering ourselves to new ideas, different belief systems, different ethical standards, free will. And we make those choices every day. This is just a little bit different and more exaggerated in that type of possession, I guess.
Yeah, and so Alpha's got a question for Shawn, and we're going to get to that here in a quick second. I'll let Shawn answer it. I just want to jump in and say to the the point we were making about spirituality in a home and things like that. Now, I think this is going to lead into what Jen and I were getting into about proper investigations into residential cases. That's what we're talking about doing an episode on. So I don't want to get too deep in the woods. However, I also equate it to this. Okay, so guys, if you ever notice, a lot of mainstream medicine nowadays, you go to the doctors, right? They're really going to come up with, like, you tell them, hey, this is how I feel. They look at you, they take your signs, blah, blah, blah. They want to get you the prescription that's going to fit your need, right? But they're not so much focused on the root cause, right? So, and that's why I want to go back to the paranormal stuff is there's not always, and Jen brought this up in our discussion last night, was there's not always enough interviewing questions, so to speak, getting to those other causes that are in the house. I think, and even Shawn was touching on it, is if you have a teenager, right, preteens especially, that are in that rebellious phase, a lot of teen angst, well, this is associated with a lot of poltergeist activity. All right, this is something that's been known in the paranormal community for decades. Okay, it's not new. So, and if you're a team and you're going into a situation and you're not trying to find out more and you're more focused on just the home and what's going on, well, you're just looking at the symptoms or whatever, right? You need to figure out what's causing that. What's the root? What is contributing to those things? What are the other factors going on? And is there somebody, that's, again, a teen, in a troubled teen or whatever? Is there domestic violence sometimes that happens in some of these homes? That these are things that happen behind closed doors they don't want to talk about. But as an investigator, these are things that can uncover a lot of things that are going on. So I just wanted to touch on that since Shawn and Jen, everybody was kind of talking about that. I wanted to throw that in there. But Alpha asked, he said, Shawn, can resignation also be considered a willful giving over?
Let me put my glasses on and read that real quick. Yeah, she touched on it already. Resignation can be when someone gets tired of the battle, when they get tired of the fight, they get tired of the anxiety. Maybe they don't even know what's going on. They just give themselves over to the depression. They give themselves over to what's happening. Yeah, that can lead into some of this. I think what I would put this out there. There's definitely that does happen, but this is my opinion now, in a total true possession, the person has willfully, not through battle, not through nutrition, but willfully is even asking for this possession to happen. Now, I know that'd be hard for some people to swallow, but the cases I've looked at, and not been a part of, but the cases I've looked at, they had to renounce that willful asking of that demonic or that spirit they had to renounce it. They had to confess it before the Lord. I did this ritual. I asked that spirit to be a part of my mind. I asked that spirit to give me this or to do this. And then they have to renounce it, and they have to actually go through the ritual that they did to do that. And there's some very elaborate rituals, and they have to go through the cleansings. They have to go through all that stuff and renounce every bit of it, or there's still that residual or that backside of that. And so that's kind of where I would go with it. So the resignation of I'm just giving up, I can't fight these demons anymore. Yeah, that can lead to it, but you still have a little bit of that free will there, in my opinion. So I'll let some of the others speak on that.
I think that's where you were talking about, the cases where it is a full-on mount, the 100%. That's why they're so rare, right? You get right up to that window, and then there's that gap, right? And that I think that's what you just described as the difference between the two.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Well, go ahead, Stacy.
I've seen instances where there's full on possession, and they may not necessarily have done ritual. They've been under the influence of a lot of other things that has allowed that opening to take place. I mean, all you got to do is look at the news, and if it ever starts with the headline "Florida man did this," it usually involves, something really bizarre that you knew full on possession, or he was drunk, or both. I mean, one guy recently claimed that he was teleported into a BMW, and while it was going down the road, he didn't steal it. He was teleported there. That actually has more of possession to it, in my mind, because in possession you have missing time.
Yeah, dissociation, yeah.
Yeah, you're doing one thing, and the next thing you know, you're someplace else, literally in the blink of an eye. And you're like, oh my God, how did that happen? And it can feel like teleportation, but it was actually a full-on possession that took place. That he was stealing a car, but it wasn't him.
Well, this would raise a question, and by the way, I'm not discounting what you're saying. I want to raise this question. When somebody dissociates, does that mean that they're necessarily full-on possessed? Because I've seen cases where they're not fully on possessed, but they've lost control for that moment, and they've lost time, because it's like whether we're talking about multiple personalities or whether we're talking about the idea of I myself have been in times and with situations to where I've been so stressed out and so busy that I don't remember driving from the church to the house. So, dissociation can happen so many different things. But what's your thoughts on that?
Chanel, you can probably answer questions on disassociation.
I'm over here like, wait, are you going back to psychology? Because
well, it's not necessarily psychology, but when you're into deliverance and when you're dealing with people who meditate regularly at certain points, because I've seen people who's meditated most for like 5 or 6 years and got very adept at it, they sometimes can't stop it because the spirits are bringing it in. Is that possession? Is that a full possession?
Well, I wouldn't call that possession. That's more of a muscle memory kind of a thing, where it's a reflex. The brain actually creates, habits. The neural pathways actually, your routine is a routine because your brain has created neural pathways that this thing requires less actual brain power to work with, because those neural pathways have been carved in. If you're meditating at a certain time every day, those neural pathways are there. It's just like smoking or any other habit that you have. It's difficult to reroute those neural pathways. So if you suddenly stop meditating, your brain is still going to fall into a point of meditation at that point. So
I could see that.
Yeah, and I don't think 100%. Oh, go ahead, Chanel. You go ahead.
Sorry, can I touch real quick on what Shawn had said about like the multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder? In the world of psychology, when people are possessed, that's what it is. That's what it gets labeled. Which that in itself, I can talk so much on like Western thinking versus Eastern thinking around this topic itself. And that's a whole other day of discussion, but that's what it's labeled as. So
yeah, I've worked with 2 psychologists and working with one right now with a lady who's got many different types of personalities, and we're working through them. And one of the things that we're finding with her particularly is a lot of the stuff that she was involved in has created the trauma from childhood, from different aspects of her life that she's involved in. And so a lot of that, missing time can be when someone's switching into, like I said, a different personality as well, or dissociative disorder, where like we just described. I agree with that too. I think there is that moment of, muscle memory or spiritual memory as well. But, like you mentioned, the guy in Florida, I was thinking about when you said that, what kind of sparked that was The lady that jumped out of her car, killed the guy. I can't remember. It was in Michigan or somewhere, and she came out of the dissociative state that she was in, and I later learned that she was a lot of meditation, and she was claiming in the court system that she was under a kind of whether it may be muscle memory or not. But that's what I was asking, because I'm not settled on the issue. So
Well,
Yeah.
it really does come down to the type of person you are in the meditation that you do, on whether it's an actual daily routine. Some people make it part of their daily routine, so they go into work completely stress-free, without anxiety. Because a lot of people are getting anxious and have anxiety before they even arrive at work, and it kind of ruins the whole day. So they started meditation just to stop that process. Um, it really does depend on the person. Like we were talking before, the 16 different personality types. You can have more than one personality type at any given time. Trump, for instance, he's got three. If you want to go to the archetypes of Carl Jung, Trump is the architect. He's the builder. That's his favorite thing to do. He's the closer, who closes deals, the art of the deal, and he's also the drill sergeant, which is the CEO, the one who's the commander in chief. He's always had those three, and he switches between them at will, depending on what room he's in. And you can have more than one personality type and not be considered schizophrenic,
right.
even though people say Trump is schizophrenic. That's more politics than anything else.
That's a different thing altogether.
Well,
I know.
I'm gonna
a personality disorder, not a personality type.
I'm gonna deepen some shit right here. So here we go. I'm gonna like take this up a notch. Are you all ready? So first of all, at what point can we say, is it an actual mental disorder, or is there spiritual involvement in there, right? Is there demons, like evil spirits, attachments, or is there an actual true medical disorder? And if there is these medical deformities in us as a society, could this also be a product of, and I'm going to go all the way back to Stacy talking about sins, gluttony, greed, things like this. Is this because we live in a society that was full of greedy people that were profiting off of selling us false medical information, and now we have generations of kids that are skyrocketing in ADHD and autism and a lot of mental defects and things, all seem to follow this trajectory of these false food pyramids and all these things. So if you look at the bigger picture, is that the sins that we are now paying for? Because is it truly messing us up, or is there attachments out there? This is a much bigger battle in spiritual warfare on a big frame than we realize.
I think there's a whole nother question in there too.
That's a whole
Well,
other discussion.
Yeah,
It ties back to what Shawn was saying in the very beginning. The different types of commands that are going on around the world. You have, institutions or global influence that a lot of these spirits, tap into. I mean, Jeffrey Epstein did not happen in a vacuum. These things are, on a global scale, the people who are the most powerful in the world have some really evil shit that is influencing them. Whether they actually brought that in on themselves and, signed a pact or whatever, I can't say. I don't know. I would say yes, but I don't know. But they have a lot of influence in steering things with the World Economic Forum. They get together and have a quasi-semi-government that tries to rule the whole world, but their motivations are the same as every other schleb who walks around. It's greed, it's pride, it's gluttony, it's all of these things that they're trying to essentially turn into a global industry. They themselves are the ones that are having to pay for that eventually, even though we're the ones that are getting hurt and causing a lot of, chain effect. On the bright side, it's not all doom and gloom. We've talked about the 100 monkey experiment, where you get a certain number of people doing one thing, and then suddenly all the rest of the monkeys know. There's a crescendo to a small group of people getting together and expanding it to such a degree that suddenly it enters the zeitgeist and everybody's in on it. We've crossed that threshold. People are now being able to see things for what they are, because conspiracy theories aren't conspiracy theories anymore. They are what actually took place. Turns out, who knew? That threshold, that 100 monkey experiment, we're seeing in real time. People are waking up to the spiritual influence, the really evil stuff that has been going on. And I think that's great. It gives me hope, because for a while it looked like we're on a real downward spiral, and I'm like, what is wrong with everyone? During the lockdowns and everything, gave birth to so many petty tyrants that everyone who had any smidgen of power suddenly decided that you needed to be locked into your house for 2 years. All these tyrants out there just came out of the woodwork. That went away because everybody turned around and said, no, piss off, I'm going to do my thing. And their eyes were open and not motivated by fear, which is what the global spirits or influencers, that's what they peddle in.
I'd jump in there and agree 100%. I think that I can't go into a whole lot of it, but I've been working a lot with law enforcement and things with a lot of different angles, not just with the spirituality aspect, but in working with the police psychologist and stuff like that. And one of the two things I want to say out of that, one, it's been very interesting to see the police and law enforcement asking me questions about certain spiritual things that's happening. And
that's great. That's outstanding.
And it's not about a Christian thing. It's like, we're seeing this. What do we do with it? And then the second thing is a lot of stuff that came out. I think, I worked with some teams. Craig Sawyer, I didn't work directly with him, but we've been in that area, let me just say. And I think it's been going on at a local level with law enforcement. I mean, at a grass level, I should say, with the law enforcement. And it's only the tip of the iceberg. People don't realize, Epstein inherited what he had. This didn't start with him. This you can go back and look at some of the hotels he stayed at in California and all that. So, and see the people that were grooming him as a young man. This stuff has been going on. And I think what you were saying, Stacy, is so true, that I think we don't need to be afraid to talk about the evil, but we also need to say, this is what we need to do. This is how we combat it. This is coming back to our spiritual warfare ideas. Wherever you're at, you need to be able to say, this is wrong and this needs to be dealt with. So,
yeah. No, I want to say, guys, we'll probably start wrapping up because I think we've covered this really well tonight. We probably could go back and forth on good versus evil, because this is what it's all about. The battle between good versus evil within yourself, within the world. That's what spiritual warfare really is. It's that internal battle, that spiritual battle that everybody has. You can almost picture it like they they show in all the TV shows and movies where they have the devil pops on one shoulder, the angels on the other, right? And then there's the spiritual warfare. It's the devil in your head. Now, whether it's an attachment or whatever, or maybe it's part of a mental disorder or an old habit, something that's, a chronic, problem and things like that, sure, you could say that could be the devil. No matter what it is, whatever you want to say, that battle that goes on in all of us, that fight, that internal struggle. Okay. And so I think hopefully you guys watching, I hope some of you maybe even got some inspiration from this to know that there is ways to fight that spiritual warfare. And if you don't know how, if you have those struggles, reach out. Even if it's your local church, swallow your pride. Don't listen to the mainstream people and be like, churches and blah, blah. Stop. All that's good stuff. Okay. Churches predominantly are for good people, or they have good intentions. And if you're not comfortable doing that, again, reach out to other people that are involved in positive activities, positive spiritual activities as well. And even us, like if you need help, we can help guide you and point you in the right directions on things and give you our advice. But I hope you guys understand that start your spiritual warfare with yourself. If everybody was to really get themselves under control, this world would be a lot better place, right? And I am happy that they're bringing back the mental asylums. I am, because our grandkids need places to investigate in the future, new places, right? So they can't just keep going to the same old closed down ones. So I think that's good to feed in another future generations down the road some new paranormal spots in the future. But guys, everybody in the chat that's participated, all your comments, you guys are always, it's amazing having you guys show up. It's good to see some of you folks that are regulars now. So I keep showing up. Guys, don't forget, join us every Thursday, 9 p.m. for a new debate, a new discussion, and who knows, because next week we may get into some residential procedures that we talked about, because I think that could be really good, where we talk about investigative procedures. But as always, guys, thank you all so much. And for those on the council, stick around as we end the stream here, and we'll be backstage. All right, guys. And a new hat. Oh, you're going to make me get into like wearing a new hat each time, huh? I don't even like wearing hats. I just need a haircut. That's the thing. So that's the only reason why I've been wearing hats. I just need a haircut. All right, guys. You have a good night.
Peace.
As soon as I get there we go. Let's get the outro.